And welcome to Die Shrink, a supplemental gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I'm joined by, well, not Dan, but something that happens every now and then, a guest on a Die Shrink episode. Please, just introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Ross Scott. I think I'm on here because I've been I founded a movement called Stop Killing Games, which is devoted to challenging the legality of publishers selling video game, then disabling it at an undisclosed length of time later, and keeping your money. And that leads to the game being usually bricked or destroyed forever. So that's the short version.
Now, why now? Or when did you file, and why did you file then and not a month before or a month later?
Oh, file what?
Or when did you start this movement? That's what
last year. It really kicked it off in April, and what led to that was we've pursued this in many different ways, but there was a game called The Crew by Ubisoft, which was an ideal candidate to test the legality of this before various consumer protection agencies. It checked off a lot of boxes for as a good test case, because while this is locked down in the United States, there's no ambiguity there. In many countries, it's not clear if what's going on is even legal or not. I make an analogy a lot to Uber when it first came on the scene, where governments weren't sure, is this a taxi service? Or these contractors, employees? Like, the laws just weren't written for that kind of situation. It's very similar to this practice in video games.
Okay, so the perfect test case came along, and you're like, but this is something that you've been worrying about for a while, right?
Oh, yeah. It's honestly bugged me. It's worried me personally for decades, but more recently, for about 10 years now, I've been making videos off and on trying to sort of raise the alarm on this, but it didn't amount to anything until I saw an opening to act on this.
All right. I want to start off with a fun question, though. Floyd writes in and says, what are some of your favorite old games? What are the games you grew up on? They don't even need to be good. Just what did you like when you were younger? And do you ever feel like going back and revisiting them? Are there any games you remember well also, but then feel like you're the only one who ever played them?
Yeah, there's several. I mean, I guess if you go way back, the first games I was playing were Commodore 64 ones. River Raid is one of the first I remember, and I actually made a video on another one that had blurry memories. It was called Captain Zap, and despite being Commodore 64 graphics, it took place in this surprisingly atmospheric jungle, and like with a silhouette and everything. And the Commodore 64, I still think it was kind of the Wild West as far as what was going on in video games. I mean, I think there were thousands of titles, and there were no real rules then. There was just developers kind of figuring things out and experimenting.
Some of these games made by a team of 1 to 3 people. Oh,
yeah. And see, now there's all sorts of things known about game design and what's going to work and what sort of genres. There was none of that. I mean, there might have been a little bit of it if they were trying to make a Mario clone or something, but other things, that would always be an interesting test. Is some Commodore 64 games some would be literally unplayable without a manual. Like, you might hit every button, and then maybe a menu comes up and then it disappears, and then maybe a dot moves to the right, and then that's it, and then you're not sure what's happening.
Yeah, if I think back to some of my favorite older games, it would be like, I like the Sonic games. If I were to progress forward a game that I think, like, just trying to think of a game that, like, was really good at the time and I don't really feel ever was truly replaced in a satisfactory way that makes me feel like I can play that same sort of game again. I can think of games that come close, like Ghost Recon Wildlands, but like Mercenaries from like the PS2, Xbox era. I mean, they made a Mercenaries 2 for the 360 and stuff, but that was terrible and it just didn't work. And like this open world game that wasn't just like running around, or like it actually had large militaries somehow on like a PS2 type console could actually run that. And I thought that was so much fun, man. To directly answer his question too, a game I feel like I played that no one else played is SOCOM 3. not the first one, not the second one, but like SOCOM 3 or Combined Assault, the one that added co-op and had big 32-player battles with vehicles. I to this day, I still don't think any games truly. Battlefield's the closest you're getting, really, like something like that. I know there's been spiritual successors that have attempted it. I don't think they've done it.
Yeah, well, I've probably the games I feel like I played that nobody else has done. I've made some videos on, so probably more played them afterwards. Probably one of the strangest. I'm sure some people played it, but I remember being surprised nobody had talked about this. It's called Armed and Delirious. It was a 5 CD game that had a lot of production. It's probably the weirdest game I've played that had a lot of production.
It looks weird. I just Googled it. It looks very weird.
Play this grandmother with dementia going in her flying washing machine across these different planets out in space, and everybody else is very weird too. And I couldn't fathom how that one hadn't gotten more attention because it was such an oddity, but like an oddity with a budget. That's you don't see that too often because there's all kinds of weird games now, but they tend to look like they were made by a couple people. But
there are exceptions though, like Death Stranding I can't even believe that game is made. Like it's I like it. It's insane though. It is insane.
I played a bit of it. I kind of gave up after about an hour or so because I was thinking this feels like a job. Like it's not that it was bad. It's just like it was giving me more vibes like you might expect from like those job sim games. And I was thinking, well, I like the mystery element and the weird sci-fi stuff and the different society, but man, it's like, okay, I'm struggling to go up this path and then I have to carry this stuff back and then check my inventory. I'm thinking, I don't know, this is feeling a little, it's crossing, it's straying away from the fun threshold for me, but I ended up watching a playthrough
either
of
it's
it.
one of those games. I would compare this kind of like to Demon Souls or Elden Ring. Either the gameplay clicks with you or it doesn't. It's not about it being easy or hard, because I don't even think Demon Souls is that hard. I think just does that type of challenge appeal to you. And with Death Stranding, it just clicks with me and you have no idea it's funny you say like job sim, because this is probably a similar feeling, although none of those have clicked with me. But like I brought the exact amount of ladders, I planned the route across the mountain range perfectly, and just coming down the mountain, rappelling down, and being like, I got here exactly how I thought I would with the right amount of equipment. It's really like an intense hiking simulator, right? Or like mountaineering simulator in a way, except every now and then sci-fi ghosts try to kill you.
Yeah, for me, I'm probably pickier. Where the vibe I really got from it was if I had half a dozen mods that tweak things, I probably would have played through all of it. I ended up just watching a playthrough of it to get this. I would say to get the story, but I'm not sure how much I actually got. But
it's good.
I saw things. So,
yeah, and again, to compare it to the Souls games again, I've seen people go, can they just patch it for an easy mode? It's like, no, they can't. It's just not for you, and that's okay. That's okay. It's not for you, and and that's a different reason you didn't like Death Stranding, or should I say, it didn't click, right?
Yeah, it didn't. I was intrigued, but it's honestly, there's so many games now. I've found myself getting pickier. So the ones that like really land, I just dive in all the way. But others, it's like,
No, I know the feeling. I mean, it's probably just a part of getting older, right? And I think that's a thing. I'll see people in the comments. I wonder what you think about this. I'll see people in the comments say stuff like, there's no good games anymore. And I'll go, there's tons of good games. You just don't want to play these games. And that's okay. And if you aren't interested in these games, take a break. That's fine.
Oh, yeah.
There's tons of games that I know are good that just I didn't keep playing, and it's not the game's fault.
Oh no, I don't have that. People saying that, I think they're either very limited, like much pickier than I am in their tastes, so that all these thousands of games are coming out, they just don't appeal to them at all, or maybe they are playing too much. Like, if you find yourself enjoying the first hour or two, but then you're not enjoying after that, stop, do something else. Come back to it when you feel like playing it again. Or if you don't, then maybe that wasn't the right game,
And I was trying to scrambling through my brain. Was there any example of something like that where I actually did come back to it? And one of them was Metal Gear Solid 2. I was like a teenager or like 14. My parents let me rent it from Blockbuster. And I remember playing it, and I remember thinking it was kind of good, but just being like, what is this? This is weird as heck. And then just 5 years later, became a huge Metal Gear Solid fan. And it's just like, it just didn't work for me then, but it way worked for me later.
Well, then it happened. Actually, I found my taste haven't shifted dramatically from a while back, but actually one of my all-time favorite games, System Shock 2, was like that, where I played some of it. I was thinking, yeah, this is really cool, but then I got diverted by something else. Didn't come back to it until years later, and then finished it, and it was great. So,
yeah, I think that's just, again, I'm glad you agree with me on this. It's just people that say there aren't any good games. First of all the games that already existed, you can go play. So no one's taking them away. Well, we're about to talk about that.
But,
some of them might be trying to take them away from you. Most of them haven't been taken away from you. But like, if you just aren't interested in anything, or like you're tired of Marvel movies, stop watching Marvel movies then, dude. Like, you can just not watch them, watch something else, come back when maybe you're burnt out on a TV show, then stop watching that TV show. It's okay. It sometimes means it's gotten worse. It doesn't always mean that way. And with how many games there are now, I don't think you can just say there are no good games.
Oh, no, that's silly. Like, actually what I do, it got to a point now where I realized I had so many games that it was just kind of getting lost in the pile. So a couple of years back, I used this software to just index everything, and then I could find out what platform it was on, or if it was on Steam or disc or whatever. And then I sorted it so that I found a screenshot for every single one on the list, and then I could hide them when I had played it. So now I can just, every single time I open up that collection, just see these screenshots. It just always gets me excited, because it's like, oh wow, this looks cool. And then I just have to kind of pick one for the moment. So yeah, if you want to amp yourself up more to play a game, just get rows of screenshots of ones that you have or something, and then see which ones sort of jump out at you.
Yeah, that's seeing something associated with a game you can play. Like, I'll see, I guess not anymore because they don't make them anymore. You'll see like a medieval game and you'll be like, I might want to go back and play Mount and Blade Bannerlord. Or like, you'll see like a certain shooter and it's like, I should play Battlefield now. I want to, after seeing that Spec Ops movie or something. But sometimes just things get you into it, and then that's all it really took. And again, not forcing yourself, I think, is important. But all right, we've been dancing around. The pleasantries are over. I kind of just want to put the a quarter in the machine and let you go. What is Stop Killing Games, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Okay, well, as I said, it's a movement to stop publishers from effectively destroying video games. And it's doing this mostly through existing consumer laws. We've shot this several different ways. The big thing going on right now is a European Citizens Initiative, where if we get enough signatures, and it looks like we probably have enough of those, but we can always use more. In a few months, this issue will be brought before the EU Commission to basically propose new law on this issue, to say that, hey, we want some protections that when you spend money on a video game, the publisher can't just destroy it later for any reason. Now, there's a lot of nuances to that, but that's the kind of core argument there.
Mm-hmm. What is the exact thing you would like to require? Like, I mean, I don't.
Yeah, sure. Well, the exact thing we're asking for is when you buy a game and then the publisher shuts it down, they need to have some sort of end of life plan. Like, it would be their choice how exactly it would be implemented for a few reasons, but it could be like an end of life patch to allow peer-to-peer hosting, or it could be them just saying, screw it, here are the server binaries, or they patch it to use alternate server code or something like that, so that after they've done that, the game doesn't require any connection to the publisher to run, and it doesn't require a connection to like affiliated third parties, like if it had Denuvo on it or something like that. And then I guess most of these do have multiplayer functionality that they would be targeting, but so if it's multiplayer, it would have to be able to support, private servers or something similar to that in some way. Or if it's single player, it would have to be able to, or single or local multiplayer, it would have to be able to, just run offline essentially. So.
And so this, See, because when I first heard about this, I kind of assumed it was just like you can't have a single player game that had some component to online, and then all of a sudden you can't play the single player game anymore arbitrarily because they just don't let you, even though they could put out a patch that would, you know, an example, I've already brought up this game, but an example I would bring up is like Demon Souls. You can write messages, you can summon people. This isn't an issue because Sony continues to basically support Demon Souls in some form for a very long time now. But like, let's say they said we're going to kill the Demon Souls servers, and I believe they might have on PS3 by now. And instead of just what I believe they did is they're like, look, you can't connect anymore, but the game still works. Ultimately, are you trying to like stop it from single player games straight up not working? Because there are some single player games they just kill that really has no reason to kill. Or would you say, even if it's cumbersome, just leave something out there so that you could use Komachi or whatever that is, or, you know, Hamachi or whatever, something to connect to other people? Or is it enough if it's like, hey, at a minimum, we made it so you can keep playing the game, but of course, no, you're not going to get invaded anymore?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If the industry had been running things like, you know, the Dark Souls style for all these games of single player content, I probably wouldn't have bothered starting this movement because
so that is a good example of like
good
what
enough. That is a good example because you know most of the meat's there, but it is also technically a multiplayer game if you want it to be. You know, where you join other people's things, other people's games. But since I had to go through all this trouble, we're trying to just clear it outright that, you know, protect multiplayer also. Plus, there's another aspect to that is we're seeing a lot more games kind of merge the two. So, I mean, Dark Souls is a very playable single-player experience if you can't connect to the internet, you know. But some examples are like The Division or the game we had, The Crew, or Diablo 4, maybe 3 too, where this you can't. It's not a nice and neat separation of the single player. The single player is running as though it was a multiplayer game. So it would just be a loophole if we only focused on single player games that just had like a small requirement, and to save those, then that would be a loophole that would just leave out potentially hundreds of games that also have single player content in them. So we're kind of aiming for almost everything, but there does get to be nuances to this depending on the type of game you're talking about.
Right. And so here's an example I'd like to bring up, because a game that I used to love playing a ton was Metal Gear Online 2, specifically the one attached to MGS4. And of course, this is controlled by Konami. They are not known for always doing the most pro gamer things. And eventually they just said, hey, we're killing it. There are still people that play it. All DLC is free for the next month, and then it's dead after a month. And just like that, it was gone. You couldn't even log into MGO and play in the offline training area. You couldn't try to do some peer-to-peer hosting system, although I think that game was peer-to-peer, mostly not dedicated, so they probably could have done that. Maybe I'm wrong, though. I apologize to anyone if I am. Would you be trying to fix that in some way so that it's like the final patch from Konami has to have some open-ended thing that someone could connect to peer-to-peer play with people if they wanted to?
If that's how the game was advertised and sold, then yes. Now, there is some wiggle room because we're asking, like, the initiative asked for, like, a reasonably playable state. There are some things that would be effectively impossible to have if the game is unsupported, like, let's say, admins, or a third-party anti-cheat service that, you know, that they were paying money to. So, you know, there might be some features that don't make the cut, like I doubt this would be. Well, actually, maybe it would be. Like in Dark Souls, like the messages or something. If that's stored on a central database or somewhere, maybe that's not so manageable to have at end of life. But if the game's advertised as having multiplayer, you can connect to other people and play against them or with them or something like that. Well, then it does. That's a more concrete requirement. The way this will work is it's kind of a spectrum where the more, like, let's say, well, this might be one of the questions you have. Let's say they had a patch where at the end of it, it's like, okay, it technically runs, but all that happens is you get into a menu and then there's no gameplay or anything. Well, that wouldn't really cut it in the EU. What would happen in that case, if this law passed, is customers would see this, they would send a complaint to the Consumer Protection Agency, and if they got a lot of them, they probably look at it and look into it and say, oh yeah, you're right. This doesn't have any. This has almost nothing that was advertised in the game, and then hit them with a fine. Whereas if it was something like, like let's say the Dark Souls messages, it's like, yeah, that's a nice aspect, but if the rest of the game is there and people can still connect, that's not going to get that many complaints. Or they might, even if it did, they might decide, well, this isn't a feasible thing to do unsupported. So that would probably slide. But there's lots of aspects of like that. They're just, the thing is, every game is different. So, the answer for one game is going to be very different than another one sometimes.
Yeah, so it almost seems like you want to have a list of outlines for like pretty much every game type you can come up with, like 20 guidelines, where it's like if-then statements almost, like, even if the game is basically still not worth it, your argument. I do actually think Metal Gear Online might be a good example, where they sold that game separately, at least outside the US, not as a package that was part of MGS4, to which you could argue there's nothing to complain about. This was some bonus part of it. But it was sold as its own game for like, I think $40. And you would argue, okay, well, so this was sold for $40. It wasn't sold as a live service game with a monthly fee. It was sold as, this is $40 and you get to play these maps with other people. All right. So at a minimum, when you boot it up, there shouldn't just be a screen that says too bad. You should at least be able to go to a menu, customize your character, at least go through, like, load up a map and walk around the trading zones at a minimum. And I think, right, you would agree that is something that would probably be covered. But then would there be something covered where you're like, also, there's now, I don't really understand the technical side of this, but, you can plug into this and connect with other people this way, and we're just letting you do it. But there's no admins, refs, anything. It's just, yeah, look, if you all connect your PS3 to a LAN server, even if you had to physically be next to each other, the game is still playable.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have to. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And let's say the server that normally hosted all that, it just can't be run like on the platform that the client came on. Like
it requires dedicated.
It's like incapable. Well, in that sort of scenario, what they could do is release, there's whatever server solution they were comfortable with, because we can't actually, I'm tripping over my words here. Okay, so they would release that, but then say, okay, well, in order to run this, you're going to need a dedicated Linux machine, and it was designed for an ARM processor to run it. But if you're willing to host that, you can take your PS3 copy, which will patch to enter in an IP address, and then you can connect to that.
So anyone can manually enter an IP at boot up. It doesn't
have to be convenient or easy. It just has to not be impossible, is what we're.
But you could see this opening up a whole new business where, like, kind of like hosting Battlefield servers for clans or something. Someone's like, oh, we looked at this. We bought a Linux server. I run it in my basement. And so if you want to play Metal Gear Online, I'm hosting like 10 rooms every night. And then, you could pay or not pay. Maybe they'll do it for free to join that. And it's not on the manufacturer of the game to do anything with it. They're just like, this is the minimum to do a peer-to-peer connection, and you can do it, basically.
Yeah, they could wash their hands of it. And actually, as far as business, we'd be agnostic on that. So we could leave that. So if the developer says, like, hell no, you're not going to charge for these servers ever,
all right,
fine,
they could put
leave
that
it in there. And others might not care, so fine, leave it. That would be a non-issue. Something you did mention that's you were talking about live service games or a subscription fee. I should clarify that, because that one is different, I guess. That's one we're going to try to have protections for, but we'll probably lose on, because when I talked about how the law isn't clearly defined on this, but those ones that require a monthly fee, like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, those seem to meet every definition of a service, where they tell you exactly when your access ends, and that's it. So the only argument we can make would be on grounds of like cultural preservation, which have far weaker laws than consumer rights. Because most live service games, they're either free to play and then you pay for microtransactions, or you pay once and then there's no time frame whatsoever. And that's the part that is giving us an opening on the law on this, because it's not established that's legal in many countries, especially in the EU.
Mm-hmm. All right. So again, the bare minimum, what can you do? And am I wrong? Like the ultimate goal is something like the makers of the games have to put the modicum minimum amount of forethought into how they will sunset their game when they release it. We're not asking them to like prepare to all these zombie games with no one on them they have to support forever. We're saying before you ship the game, this law, if you want to sell it in the EU, says you also have to present, by the way, this is the minimum we will do at the end so that we're not, lying about what we sold people.
Yeah, and it's not destroyed. That I can actually get into that because some people get hung up a lot. Well, two things. I guess first thing is this initiative is not retroactive. It couldn't be even if we wanted it to, because that's not how it works. So we're talking about some point in the future. Let's say you have 2028 or something. If this were to go into effect, it would be games after that are being sold after that point that would be affected. And a lot of things could happen once it hits the EU Commission. Like maybe they might decide, okay, this is too big a change to handle all at once. We're going to grandfather in existing games, but then any new ones sold after that, that's to start following these new rules. So as much as we might like to have games on the chopping block or of ones that have already been killed, that's not really an option. Another aspect that people get hung up on is saying, well, there's no way you can do this because then you're asking for their intellectual property and there are all sorts of laws against that. And that's true. So the initiative is actually worded in a very careful way in regard to this, in the sense that we're not saying, oh, you need to provide the server binaries or you need to provide the source code or you have to patch it this way, because as soon as we specify that, then that could trip over existing copyright law. So what we're doing is focusing on the outcome, which is a reasonably working game. And the thing is, with all these game licenses that are sold, they have to sell you some rights just for you to play the game in the first place. But the thing is, almost all of these online-only games and their license agreements have terms like can be terminated at any time for any reason. And terms like that might actually run afoul of EU law. That's currently being tested. It's unknown right now. It's a legal gray area. So if those are found to be like not lawful, then those would be nullified, which means the company has been put back on the hook for providing you those basic rights that they gave you to play the game. So,
I see.
So sorry if I lost you.
No. I'm just thinking. No, it's not. You're saying we're just saying whatever rights you said they got by purchasing the game, those are there in perpetuity within reason. That's all you're trying to do.
Yeah. Unless they said like, okay, it's World of Warcraft, you have these rights for 30 days, and then you have to pay up if you want to renew it or something like that.
Which is conceivable because you are already paying a monthly fee anyway, so that's not like the
so because then it really is meeting normal service standards. I mean, we like those games too, but we have to confront reality also for what might happen.
Well, and your thing about, this is only for future games, that makes complete sense to me. Obviously, you can't retroactively make this apply to a bunch of games that were made when the laws were different. That's really, I would argue, not fair to companies. But at the same time, most of the older games don't have these issues. And you're just worried that what we're looking at now is just the beginning of just tons of games having rug pulls and then maybe being resold, even though we were told we bought a copy of the game.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen it already. There's actually a list we've tracked of like over 700 games where we found like there's been hundreds that have been shut down and then they never came back. So they're effectively been killed. But there's like over 300 or so that we counted that are kind of at risk, where they work today, but if the company decided tomorrow, okay, we're ending support, that game's bricked. It's not coming back unless they get really lucky and there's a dedicated group working on a server emulator, which usually takes years of work and geniuses at the helm for doing that.
So, yeah, that makes sense. If you wouldn't mind, then I want to continue this conversation with just some questions, like asking about what you're really trying to do here. So Carbon Cry writes in and says, how will constantly changing games be dealt with? most live service titles cycle maps, dungeons, raids, update or remove or otherwise change them, making the original content inaccessible. In fact, actually, an example that comes to mind is Destiny 2, where the files became so cumbersomely huge that they said, we're cutting out the part of the game no one plays anymore because the game file's too big. That's my understanding of what happened. But will SKG require, what will it require in those cases? Is it probably crazy to require all versions to be provided at end of life? But I could also see developers use a final content patch that removes all content except for, say, bot training. It's kind of what I'm saying Metal Gear Online might have to do. Then they can EOL with no servers, no content, but fitting the last version of the game, which has the content ripped put out, and only offline single player bot training maps remain.
Yeah, well, some of that we touched on earlier with that if it's a multiplayer game and the end version is just a room with bots that isn't representative of what people paid for, then no, that wouldn't be good enough. But so there's part of it that's more concrete, and there's part that's very muddy, and we honestly can't tell you. The part that's concrete is, let's say Destiny tried to do the same thing they did after the law went into effect. Like, they vaulted all these levels that were part of a DLC that people paid for. Well, if that's 90% or more inaccessible, then they could say, hey, I bought this DLC. They took away almost everything. I'm going to file a complaint to the Consumer Protection Agency in my country. And they're going to look at that and they're saying, yeah, you guys took this away, and probably hit them with a fine for that. Now, that part probably would be covered. But the part that's more nebulous would be something like, let's say something like Fortnite, where they have like the different seasons and the content's kind of going in and out, where, from one season to the next, you're still connecting to other people on a big map and building things or doing battle royale or stuff. But then some of them have additional content that was free, and then and then the next season doesn't. That would be a muddier area, and I think we would try to encourage the industry to look into options for being able to have past versions, but that wouldn't be a hard ask, because they can have a lot. That's kind of a minority of games that are doing that. Most games, when there's a new version or a new patch, that tends to be a positive thing, because it tends to be just bug fixes or maybe some quality of life features or some add-on stuff. It's a minority that's really changing things and taking things out, even though we're certainly sympathetic to that. That's something trickier that would have to get figured out. And however, one aspect of that I guess we didn't cover this is, if those seasonal things are microtransactions that have no expiration date, so you bought like a pumpkin head skin or something, and then that gets removed, well, that actually would be protected, because then you've been, even if it's a free game, you wouldn't be entitled to the free game directly because you never paid for it. But if you pay for that microtransaction and that requires the game to work, then it's kind of a roundabout way to saving that game, that you're still entitled to that microtransaction.
So are you familiar with the Destiny 2 situation, though? How would this affect them if they did what I said in this world? Like, would they be forced to add old content when they sunset the game? Or what would they be forced to do?
That one would be muddier, because they were operating before any law would have gone into effect.
No, but assuming it was after this law.
Okay, assuming it was after, yeah, like I'd say they couldn't even. There could be a grace period, but let's say you bought that DLC that had all those maps, and then they just got rid of them. I'd say at that point they have to give you some solution. I mean, it wouldn't have to be like the next day or anything, but let's say they wanted to retire. Actually, you know what they would have to do? What I think would be something like what happened with Counter-Strike Go, moving it to Counter-Strike 2, where if you want to, you can run Counter-Strike Go, but you download this old version and can connect to people, maybe get a mod to help it. They didn't literally take away your access to that. However, they push Counter-Strike 2 in everybody's face, so they tried to move along the crowd to that.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you're not being deprived of what you paid for, anything's kind of fair game. But if they're actually taking it away and you have nothing or almost nothing of what you paid for, then they're on the hook for it.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the Destiny 2 thing here, and the way some players are characterizing it is Destiny 2 was essentially deleted so that you could now play Destiny 3, with some people complaining they had $250 worth of DLC removed from the game. So, look, I'm not an expert on Destiny. I haven't really played it, honestly. I think I played the beta, and like, oh, it's fun. But if that's true, I wanted to be, I don't say lenient. I wanted to be nice to Bungie because I think they make good games. But if this is true, I agree with you. That's wrong. You can't just remove what they paid for. You have to find a solution.
Yeah,
that's not just deleting their content.
It would be a spectrum too. Like, let's say you bought the DLC and that included maps, a story, and all these weapons, and then later they removed one gun from it. It's like, well, that's...
Well, and it could be for balance reasons.
Or let's say they just straight up removed it, That's going to be harder to act on. But if they remove like 90% of the weapons and the maps, then you can really make the case. But something that might not be protected would be, let's say, the stats. So let's say all the guns are 10% weaker in a later patch. It's like, well, that probably wasn't really part of the advertising either way. That's something that there's a lot more wiggle room on.
Lucas writes in and says, what would your proposed solution be for live service games that evolve over time? I guess this is in this example. World of Warcraft is probably the best example, but there are countless others like Final Fantasy XIV that got completely wiped and redone from the ground up. Oh, this is exactly what we're talking about. Launch day Final Fantasy XIV cannot be bought, played, or accessed in any form. A versioning system that offers all iterations of the game is probably unreasonable, but does there not have to be a middle ground between that and here's the final patch, do with it what you will? Let me ask, like, isn't there a difference between them like removing the initial campaign and replacing it with a new one and removing an extra DLC you bought on top of it?
Yeah, the thing, this is why this one's muddy, because on one hand, you don't want to restrict developers if they do feel like they need to make a bunch of balance changes and stuff like that.
Well, and let me give you an example too. Killzone Shadowfall had a campaign that was very controversial because some of the levels sucked. Like, they had too many of these falling missions. Like, you'd go from one place to another, and then you like had to like hang glide down and avoid things. And it just, as someone who played that, I will say that came out of nowhere. Those missions were annoying. And I believe Guerrilla Games just patched those areas to be easier and cut them in half or removed some of them. No one's going to complain about them removing the parts that suck. But that is technically an example of that was in the base game that you paid for. But I think that is okay if they're improving it again. But if they added a DLC you paid for and then deleted that, you paid extra for this.
Yeah, it's the thing I think people should really remember is right now we have no protections. They can just kill the whole game once they're done with it. Like, so, worrying about which version, that's a luxury compared to having a version. That's the place to start on. But so I think we need those base protections first. Now, if we're lucky, we can kind of push to, maybe ask for games that do change and remove a lot to have some option to retain that in some way. But first, we just need a beachhead first of basic rights. So that's, we're definitely sympathetic to it, but it's like, let's just start with not having all versions removed and forever first, and then we can worry more about like the which versions or what were sensible rules for that sort of thing.
Carmen Ryerson says, how will stop killing games impact older games? First, games that are already end of life. Old MMOs come to mind. Most really, second, games that are still live. I think we've answered the first one. I think the second part here is the interesting part, like keeps coming up. But an easy example is something like World of Warcraft or Destiny 2, where the game was launched before this would have gone into law, but is now still a game you can play.
Yeah,
it would just be frozen in time from the moment the law goes into effect, or
no, that's something I can't tell you for certain until we get to the EU Commission. Essentially, that they would determine how that would go. But one option would be I guess if they really want to be restrictive on it, that if they're sold after that point, then they're on the hook for having an end of life plan. And it's possible some games might want to retire before that point, before the law went into effect, if they couldn't provide it. However, if I had to guess, I think what's more likely would be a lot of these games will get grandfathered in, like I talked about, where it's like, okay, because Destiny 2 is being sold before this, it doesn't get touched, but like new DLC will be on the hook for it, or a new game for like Marathon with their, or if they're still doing that, I'm not sure. So games sold after that would be affected, but if they wanted to have this like the smoothest transition possible, they might give everybody a pass who was selling prior to that going into effect.
It's interesting to think what that might do, though, if there's a game where they're like, well, we can't ever let this die now because, and then you would get into maybe a legal problem of, is this even the same game 20 years later, or are they calling a new game an old game so they don't have to have these laws? I mean, you see that all the time with like real estate loopholes, and
I still feel like that'd be a better place than where we are now, and hey, if it got really bad, somebody else might come along taking the same path we did to push that, no, you can't just destroy these games wholesale from version 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. Yeah.
Well, yeah, let me actually move this question up. Better writes in and says, assuming this gets passed, do you think you're actually hitting them where it hurts in a useful way? You claim you're making it safer to give money to companies like Ubisoft, but in my opinion, making it, in quotes, safe to support some companies is a way worse option than just not supporting bad companies, especially considering no one is going to be seriously hurt if they can't buy the latest Climb Tower and Mark a Map simulator from Ubisoft. Seeing some bias there. If people actually stop buying Ubisoft games, maybe they would have to change the top brass and get someone else in there. With a new law to follow, all they have to do is release the bare minimum of playable, and nothing else changes. So I actually would want to jump in. Something that came to mind here, like you saw these travel changes like being implemented, and like I think like Pete Buttigieg was one of those people that pushed a lot of the like new travel requirements and like pro-consumer laws for airline travel. And there'd be people that go, we shouldn't have any restrictions for airline travel. This is the analogy I would make, because the best flights will do the best in those companies. And I would just say, yeah, but when you're shopping for an airline ticket, you're not measuring in front of your knees how big the seats are and making sure like all the fine print is blah, blah, blah. Like it becomes a race to the bottom where the only thing most people inherently are going to look at buying an airplane ticket is the price that's cheapest to fly there. And they will ignore all these things until they sit on the plane, and then they get leg issues when, that's why we have a government, is if we don't like how something's treating us, they make it so they don't do that. And I would worry that there's a race to the bottom. Like you can say you can't buy games that do these things, but real talk, most people aren't going to think about that until it's too late. Just like they're not going to think paying an extra $20 for an airplane ticket might make them not have back problems for 2 days or something. And that's why we make these laws. So it might raise the price of tickets by $5. But if all of them now are comfortable seats, I mean, look, that's why we have these debates before laws are made, but that's the argument. I think it's a similar argument to like what you would probably say to this, right?
Yeah, well, first off, I do agree this actually won't hurt them that much. Like, if you wanted to hurt these companies, you should crack down on predatory monetization or loot boxes harder and stuff like that's their cash cow. That would hurt them by billions. No, this is somewhat. This could be a very minimal cost to companies. In fact, I think over time, it would almost be nullified completely, even if there would be some costs in the transition. But no, you mentioned you don't buy Ubisoft. Well, the problem is this is spreading across the whole industry. That's also don't buy EA, don't buy Blizzard, don't buy Bethesda, don't buy Capcom. No, Square Enix. And some people might say, well, fine, don't buy any of them. Well, there's two problems there. One is each game is a unique experience. You talk about airline tickets. The goal of your airline is to get to your destination. You can, if another airline goes to that destination, sure, it might be a little different experience, but you're getting what you set out to do. Whereas, the analogy I make a bunch is if I want to read Dracula, the Twilight is not a substitute for that, even though they're both about vampires. So it's each one's its own creative experience. So it's not it doesn't. In fact, I think even under the law, they're literally considered creative monopolies because you can't just buy the equivalent from the other competitor, that sort of thing. So it doesn't follow normal market dynamics exactly. But the bigger point I would make is that we've seen this happen before. Boycotts very reliably do not work with games, especially if they're popular. In fact, one of the most infamous boycotts was for Modern Warfare 2 because it wasn't allowing for private servers. And then it's become a meme because there was this boycott group on Steam that showed after the game launched that not only did a lot of the members ended up buying Modern Warfare 2, but they were playing it at that moment. Like you could see what they were playing for the members in the group. So it's like the boycott didn't hold whatsoever. So yeah, I think.
But I mean, again, to continue, you're right. There are some forms of boycotts that don't work. Like you could boycott a type of food, but to boycott all food, no one's going to do that. No one's going to boycott the biggest game usually. But again, I would say boycott airlines. Well, someone has to take a flight to go to work. They're not going to. They're not going to take the bus instead, right?
Yeah, it's with the boycotts. My opinion is I've never seen a successful boycott of a game where the game was also enjoyable. If the game's enjoyable, they can get away with anything, essentially. I think gamers can do a lot, but not play games they're not good at.
Yeah, I know. And there's like, I won't go into the boycott thing that much. But Carbon Cry writes in and says, will Stop Killing Games have any impact for the dead marketplace issue? Tom spoke about this many times with him needing to buy Age of Empires 3 multiple times because, with one of the examples, games for Windows Live purchase became inaccessible. Do you expect some, likely EU-funded archive marketplace where a copy of a dead game is available to people who have purchased it, even if the game disappears from whatever marketplace they got it in, or even if the marketplace itself is killed? I think that's the only way to prevent the problem of dying accessibility to media games, which I would also add, and this would probably never work, but you could have a clause that's like, you have to find some way for them to buy it again. If you don't, the game's free now. Like, you can't just tell people who bought something they can't download it again. Or what do you think about this question?
Well, to your solution, while that would be great, that one would probably trip up copyright law again, which would be 100 times harder. Yes, this actually would address this because we're mentioning once they're done with it, it can't require a connection to the publisher or affiliated parties. Now, there is some nuance here. Like, let's say a developer or smaller publisher, they're putting their game on Steam or something, and they're saying, okay, well, we're done with our game. We're not supporting it anymore. But Valve is going to continue hosting your copy that you bought on Steam. And let's say it has Steam DRM or something that they're using. Well, at that point, the original developer, publisher will be off the hook. But then the liability would kind of shift to Valve at that point, so that if Steam ever did need to go down, then they would have to release some way for you to download it before they did shutter it. So, like you mentioned, Game for Windows Live. Okay, so if this law had been in effect for Games for Windows Live, Microsoft would have had to release some way to kind of remove needing to connect to them in order to run those games. Now, that doesn't mean they would need to keep hosting it indefinitely, but it means they might say, hey, we're going to shut down the marketplace in 30 days or 90 days. Send an email to the customer saying, download your game now that you can back up and keep running, or else you're going to lose it.
See, but here's where I get to the interesting question on this one, because it became an issue because I had a laptop. Games for Windows Live Store was taken offline. I could still boot my game on my own laptop, but that laptop's going to break eventually, and I had no way to move that game to a new one. I couldn't package it, put it on a USB, and move the package of the game to a new thing. It wouldn't work. I tried. There was some DRM built into it that wouldn't let me transfer it to a new laptop. So in effect, I was screwed over, but they could claim, oh, well, you still could have downloaded it before. So would they have to make a way so that it becomes a portable thing that you can move? Or where do you think happens there?
I think it would have to remove I think that's probably less of an issue now because almost all DRM now does require kind of a connection to the publisher or
Sure.
party in some way. Whereas back then it might be something like a CD key or checking to make sure the sectors on your disk don't work, or it's tied to that motherboard or something. That's something it would basically have to be DRM free at that point, but it wouldn't have to be like a truly portable thing. Like you might have to reinstall it on the new system and, put under these new dependencies.
There'd be a way to transfer your files.
They would have to give the equivalent of an installer or some way to run it in a portable fashion.
Well, it's an interesting question because you get into the copyright law, and this is separate from what is the law does not always mean what is morally right. But like you could argue, I could make the moral argument that if they're not, it's a lot of like a lot of music right now too, where like a lot of artists I've noticed want you to like listen on Spotify, or you can't buy the song, and I'm like, why can't I just buy? I want to pay. I'm trying to pay you for your music. Like, couldn't you make? And then at that point, most people would morally argue, well, then you can download the song for free if you find it, because they're literally not letting you pay you for it. Or like a show like Westworld, technically copyright that's owned by someone, they're literally not letting you do it. It's a little different though, because that's like an IP, but with a game, once it's dead, it's usually dead. Any new version is going to be a remaster anyways, probably. So like, even if it isn't legally allowable, I think there's a moral argument to be made that if these people insist on not letting you pay them to use it anymore, that the least they could do is let you play it or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
But again, that's
in a perfect world.
That's moral, yeah.
Yeah, ideally, what I would want is after the company's done supporting it and selling it, they're just done with it. You might have a time gap, but then it would enter public domain, I think would be the ideal solution. But that's so much harder than what we're asking for. We're just trying to go after the worst of the worst, where no one on the planet can run it again. But you mentioned remakes. There might be one I'm not thinking of, but I actually can't think of any remake where the original game is just completely unplayable in any form. Like you can usually still bring it up on some platform.
But I'm sure you're worried that will happen. Like they'll kill the game.
Exactly. That could be the road we're on, though. I mean, so.
Yeah, is there... I don't know if there is. I mean, even like Age of Empires 3, I think there might... Well, that might kind of be like that, but I don't know. Better writes in and says, as a software developer, the worst thing I think that I sometimes hear is this should be easy, right? But look, it's never easy, and the costs are never as small as outsiders or managers suggest. On a related note, you've said, Ross, in the past that if this saves even one game, then this initiative has been worth it. But would you apply the opposite as well? If it kills even one game, should we pull the plug on it? Okay,
well, for the first part, for the cost, yeah, there could be some cost because, if you're I think the cost is going to come from, it would be that if we're following the same model, where they would just copy a whole bunch of code that they did before and just take the same license agreements from third-party vendors and slap them in there. But then because they have to abide by these new laws, they're going to have to change the terms that they negotiate with these third-party vendors and maybe change the code a little bit the way it might be more than a little bit. The transition could be bumpy. However, if you're talking about designing a brand new game, so nothing's been written yet, from the more developers I talk to, the more I'm told that this is a very solvable problem. It only gets like really ugly if you're talking about ones that were never designed for this.
Right.
And, been around for years and that sort of thing.
Because that would be my worry, like not having read through every single little thing that's trying to be done here. Is this a thing that could kill a sort of indie game from being viable?
Maybe. Well, first off, most indie games are going to be compliant right now, because if you can run them when the support ends, then and you don't have to connect to their server, then it's already compliant, because you kind of have to take on a more advanced coding and responsibility and cost to have an online only game in the first place that connects to you, because there's a lot of requirements for something like that. I mean, if somebody is just trying to make a Final Fantasy successor or something like that, then it's not, this stuff isn't really going to be needed. But, okay, for that quote that you mentioned, I'm pretty sure I didn't say that. And if I did, I'm taking it back. About if this only saves one game, then it's worth it. No, I wouldn't go through all this trouble if it was just one game. We're talking about hundreds of games, plus an industry that's promising to have more and more of this in the future. So we could be talking theoretically infinite games. So probably thousands within my lifetime at the pace we're going. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. So with that in mind, if it kills one game, the only games that it could conceivably kill are ones that are on death row already. So there's no game that, it was going to come out and it was going to be salvageable, but now this initiative means it can't be salvaged. Well, no, if this initiative is affecting it, that means it's already been designed to basically die as soon as the support ends. Mm-hmm. So it can move it's possible it can move the timetable up for some games if the EU Commission decided grandfathering in wasn't an option. But if it decided that, it would be so few, because because it's not retroactive, developers are going to have a lead time and know this is coming like years in advance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like all types of government policies, well, if they're implemented well, like tariffs or something, where it's just like, well, we're telling you this goes into effect in a year, so you have a year to prepare for this. This wouldn't be like this just drops and an indie game is like, I ran out of money and now I can't patch my game. I would have to imagine, too, there'd be some sort of legal recourse, kind of like the equivalent of bankruptcy, where you could go to a court and say, hey, man, I'm one guy that made this when I was in college. I can't afford to support these servers. Like, I'll spend an afternoon giving it to people, but I can't.
Well, even worst case scenario, they could shut it down before the law went into effect, and then just not be.
And if they were going to, they were probably going to do that within a year anyways.
Yeah. And I've also been told it's bad for these online only games. It's bad practice not to have a local test environment. And if you have that, that's half the battle already.
Yeah. All right. Last question. Cole Addict writes in and says, hello, Ross. I'm an EU citizen and I signed the petition some months ago after I looked into it. But my initial reaction when I saw the title, I have to be honest, was I think it's probably some reactionary garbage complaining that games are too woke or something, so I just ignored it. More recently in a thread, I told other people that it's about preservation of playability of online games, and they said they had the same initial assumptions as me, and then they re-looked at it themselves. I think you could have benefited maybe from more and earlier signatures of the campaign had a different name. I don't know if I agree with that or not. I think the name's pretty to the point. I don't know what I would propose as a different name off the top of my head, but I am curious. It has nothing to do with you, Ross. If I see a gamer petition, I kind of assume it's annoying, just because I've seen so many of these couched in like a thing within a thing that it's really about a different thing or trying to accomplish something that could never be done. I'm wondering if like leading this either led to sudden wanted bedfellows that you didn't want to associate with, or baggage associated with your movement that you never thought would be associated. Like, just, I almost don't even know the exact question to ask, but like, what's kind of your reaction to what he said, and like me going, I feel like the way some pro gamer movements have acted has poisoned the well for when a movement comes around. We assume it's about the same old stuff other things are about when it's really not. I wonder if you've had to deal with anything like the stuff I've thrown around here.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would agree and disagree some. Like, maybe Stop Killing Games was an ideal name. Well, actually, the EU initiative is called Stop Destroying Video Games. Destroying might have been a better term, because there were a few people who thought this was about like violent games and trying to ban them or something. So,
I like yours more than destroying, because destroying to me sounds actually more like what Cole Addict was suggesting.
Yeah. Another aspect is this is an EU initiative. This is not a change.org petition. Like, the EU has to respond to this, with assuming we get clear the signature threshold and don't have too many invalidated. So this actually has teeth to it. And like, even if they were to, it's possible, but if they were to reject it outright, I think there would be a political cost to many members of parliament doing that, because it is a populist movement and it's, trying to just get basic consumer rights, and it's a bad look for the EU. Another aspect, but yeah, I guess if you call it something else like, start saving games or something, I didn't like that, because that can mean a lot of things too. And it kind of suggests that like, we need to do more. And whereas there
It
actually
sounds like a
is,
more collective approach, not a
yeah,
law.
like it could mean like we need to save copies of games that you have so they can be copied to ISO images or something. I don't. It sounds like a less kind of forceful thing to me. Whereas we have an obvious culprit in this. They are publishers who decide to just shut down these games and give customers no recourse. So like we kind of wanted to make it clear that no, this is something that needs to be stopped. There's a force actively making this worse. And so we kind of wanted that kind of confrontational angle because that is what's happening. And I think people might respond on average more to that, though. Yeah, there has been some confusion with the wording, but it's hard to say where it goes. I will say I'm glad that the crew, that the crew is a relatively, non-controversial game that's just about driving cars around, and our game wasn't something like Manhunt or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we got lucky on that. But,
the most innocuous thing, driving cars, like nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah, but whereas something like Manhunt or Harvester or just something that Splatterhouse, something that would kind of poison the well. But as for being associated with groups, listen, we're single issue. So if you're in favor of this, we're not trying to interrogate you on what your views are on 50 other issues. You're just like, yeah, you don't want games destroyed? Awesome. You can back it,
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is the part that I definitely want to make sure we got to. So, how many signatures are you trying to get to? What concerns are there about not getting the right amount of signatures? And when is the deadline for people to give you one of their signatures?
The deadline is soon, the end of the month, July 31st. For signatures, it's the sort of thing where we won't know until after it's done if we got enough. We need 1 million valid signatures, and the highest I know of where invalid ones got thrown out are 250,000. That said, we're at 1.4 million, so we should be safe. But there were some reports earlier that some people were claiming to spoof a bunch of signatures. I think for both reasons. Some people thought they were helping by doing that. Other people wanted to sort of sabotage it because they thought the signature rate would fall off once we reached the perceived 1 million to make it look like we won when we didn't. So if the only scenario I'm worried about is if there was actual botnet activity for something like that, where we were getting thousands of false signatures day after day. I have no idea, because if it's just a few people who fake things, then that's nothing to worry about. But if there was just a real coordinated effort, and this topic does bring in a lot of tech savvy people, more is better, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think last I saw you're at 1.4 million or something like that. You'd probably feel more comfortable if you were at 2 or 3, because if even half of them were removed,
that's not going to happen unless some celebrity comes in and supports. But having another 100,000 certainly wouldn't hurt.
Right?
Especially because they're kind of creeping up now, so they're more likely to be real.
Right. And so that's what I would say is, if you're interested in this and you're in the Moore's Law is Dead community, sign up for this. And then, I also will plan to have this come out as a short or a CDY. Public, please support this. Show Ross support, show this movement support. And the last thing I would say is my take on this really is, at a minimum, it's not about like how many handcuffs can we put on developers. It's how many restrictions can we get so that there's literally anything on the books, anything but nothing to protect us, right?
Yeah, this entire thing has been me working backwards from my conclusion, where I just want to stop seeing games destroyed, or as many as I can. So we've been keeping this very narrow on the focus to try to maximize our chances. So we're not going to be pushing for other regulations. It's single issue.
All right. Well, everybody, sign up. Link will be in the description for that. And that is where I will cut this part of it. I mean, let me read out the boardroom members. These are the highest tier supporters of Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. We have Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, E. Jits, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rano, Daniel Hyde, MJB1, Toka, GZ Ziggy, SNES Chalmers, Compressed AI Blocks, Jerem Ferriera, Valco Malev, Jensen Wang, Al Shaw B, NVIDIA, Gregorius Acker, Sarcastro, Chris Rich, Evan Dingle, Halbuma, Shredburb, Sammy Wallace, Tommy, Krizin, Finos, Rizink, Win Wang, Thalo 215, 37 by 73, State Farm Snake, Smash Axley, Kareem, Al Masri, of course, the elusive man from the Mass Effect series. All right. Again, Ross, thank you for coming on. And yeah, I suppose you've already plugged yourself. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for listening, and have a good weekend, everybody.